what I've learned from my multiple visits here by talking to the experts. That's the Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection, the landowners who are affected by this humanitarian and public safety crisis, and the law enforcement challenges that exist as well. We had the Attorney General of the United States and the Judiciary Committee testifying just a couple of days ago, and I asked him whether he realized that this plan of the cartels to flood the border with people in order to preoccupy the Border Patrol in a way that would then allow the drugs to come across the border, whether that was part of their strategy. And he acknowledged it was. And of course, the drugs that have come across the border have taken the lives of 108,000 Americans last year alone. We need help from the Biden administration, but so far we've gotten nothing from them other than open border policies. I think I could probably speak for, well, certainly for myself and others, by saying legal immigration is one of the things that's made our country great. People coming to the United States in an orderly, humane, and lawful fashion have greatly benefited our country, and we want that to continue. But to surrender control of that migration and the drugs that come along with it to the criminal cartels who care nothing about the people. All they want is the money. And they don't care whether it's drugs, smuggling people, sex slaves, involuntary servitude, forced working of migrants. They don't really care. All they care about is the money. So I want to thank my colleagues publicly here for taking the time to come here, and thank the community for being as welcoming as it always is. Let me turn it over to Senator Thune.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Senator Cornyn, for hosting us. My colleagues and I have had a great opportunity to see firsthand what our Border Patrol agents are dealing with on a daily basis. This is always an incredible learning experience, and I'm grateful for the Senator Cornyn and our colleagues from Texas making it available to us on a regular basis. Let me just say, as somebody who doesn't represent a border state, that I think we all know now that every state is a border state. In Minnehaha County, which is our largest county in South Dakota, the drug overdoses were up 133% over where they were 5 years ago. And the sheriff in that county says 90% of the drugs that are coming into South Dakota are coming from the southern border. There was a huge bust up in the northeastern part of South Dakota just recently of fentanyl. Fentanyl, we all know, is incredibly deadly. 71,000 deaths last year as a result of that horrible drug. Again, a product of what's happening down here at the border. And I have to say that, at least in my view, the solutions seem really straightforward. And you kind of hear it, and you talk to people who have the job every day of trying to keep a lot of the human trafficking and the drug trafficking and the weapons trafficking and the cartels and the smugglers at bay, and just say, enforce the law. I mean, it's really fairly simple. Enforce the law, end catch and release, bring back the Remain in Mexico policy when it comes to dealing with asylum seekers, and finish building the wall. I mean, it's really that simple. And on that point, we heard something this morning that I thought was pretty astounding, and that is from the person who's in charge of the border for the state of Texas, has been trying to get the administration to allow them to take panels that are sitting here from the uncompleted wall, and to get federal easements to be able to complete the wall. And all they're meeting in Washington, D.C. is resistance. That's absolutely stunning. You can't even, the state of Texas can't even protect itself because they're, at war with the federal government. The other thing that I thought, the other data point this morning that I thought was pretty remarkable was the fact that in this last year, Chinese nationals coming across this sector of the border was up 488%. If that doesn't get the Biden administration's attention, I don't know what will. That is a really, really stunning number, and we all know an incredible national security threat. So I'm grateful to Border Patrol, the folks down here that work so hard, state of Texas, and others who have frontline responsibility for trying to police the border. But I want them to know that we're going to do everything we can to support them, because the stakes are incredibly high. When you have as many people dying from drug overdoses in this country as we do every year, and you've got literally a $13 billion industry across the border. There's a huge economy down here that needs to be shut down, and you've got an administration in Washington, D.C. that's turned a deaf ear and a blind eye, and honestly has just been missing in action when it comes to the important work that needs to be done here to protect people not only in this area, but all across the country. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here, and going to double down my efforts along with those of my colleagues to try and make sure that the folks who have that job down here have what they need to get it done, irrespective of whether or not they feel supported by the current administration.
Thank you very much, John, and well said. This is a delegation that I think is well positioned to go back to Washington and actually help make some changes at the legislative level that can be of service. I want to particularly single out, though, my colleague John Cornyn, who's a great senator, the senior senator from Texas, and has been a steady, clear-eyed advocate for sane, sensible, effective policies about the border. And I do appreciate the fact that he brings delegations down here. It's nothing like seeing it in person. And really, this should be a bipartisan issue. And I hope we'll see more than just the trickle of our Democratic colleagues coming down and seeing for themselves. We saw a lot. We were out last night, I guess till 12:30 or 1, seeing would-be getaways captured and being apprehended right there at the wall. We talked to both state, local, and federal officials, hearing from them what we need to do. We went to a stash house today that had just been raided, and in fact, it turned out to be an effective raid, and arrests were made. And so we were able to see these officials actually doing what they do best and what they want to do. And what they want to do is be out here on the ground representing the American taxpayer and stopping illegal immigration rather than doing administrative work and desk work that they've been asked to do. Let me say this, the statistics do not lie. And we see what is happening this year, 2023, and we see what happened during the year 2022. And there has to be a reason for the strong uptick. The Biden administration could not have created a more serious border crisis than we have if they had tried. The signal was absolutely sent out to anyone who wanted to hear that people should come to the border. And yes, it's not only folks from our neighboring Mexico and Central and South America, but it's from all over the world. We saw a number of Asians today. So the worldwide signal has been heard, and the world is responding because they're wanting to come here illegally. They don't get across without help. It's definitely a border that is policed on one side of the border, and that's by the cartels. Everything from gun running to drugs, to the most poisonous, fatal drugs, to human trafficking and prostitution. It is a shame and a crisis and an avoidable self-inflicted wound on this country. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate you giving us a chance to express our views to the public and send information back home. And once again, John Cornyn, thank you very much for your really strong and effective leadership on this.
Thank you, Roger. Senator Fischer.
Thank you. Well, my thanks to Senator Cornyn for arranging this outing, very educational outing that we had today, and to the Border Patrol and to all the agencies that are here and the private landowners that we had an opportunity to visit with as well. Thank you to all of them. You know, we can read about what's going on here at the border, and we can watch the news that you folks put up about what's going on at the border. But until you come down here and see it, you really don't have that full understanding, that broad picture of what this all entails. We got in late last night and went up to the border walls outside of McAllen there, and drove and made some stops and had an opportunity to have conversations with some of the individuals that had been detained by Border Patrol. It's a sad situation when you know what these people, not just what they face to get here in dealing with the coyotes, but what they face now. Because they're going to be headed north. That's the plan, to move north, to probably have to work off and pay the coyotes what they still owe them. They got them across. They're going to be indentured servants for the most part. You know, we're looking at human trafficking, sex trafficking. Senator Thune said, you know, every state's a border state. Nebraska's a border state because we've seen such an increase in fentanyl in the state of Nebraska. And that's just a recent example of what we're facing in the state of Nebraska. So I would urge the administration, especially President Biden, I would urge our border czar, Vice President Harris, to come down to the border, to talk to the people who work down here, to talk to the individuals that live down here, and I would hope they would do their job. I would hope that they would encourage the enforcement of the immigration laws that we have. I would hope that they would have an understanding that this is not only a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of illegal drugs, this is a national security crisis. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. Senator Wicker is the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee. And this is a national security crisis. We need to know who's coming into our country. We need to control it. You can get a tactical nuclear warhead in a backpack. But yet there is no security on the southern border of the United States of America. That should be laid at the doorstep of the White House and the administration. This is a dangerous situation. This is a chaotic situation. And it's time to at least get some kind of recognition from the Biden administration that they have an understanding of that and that they are willing to reach out to Republicans to find some solutions. So thank you, Senator Cornyn. Thank you to our hosts who showed us a stash house and processing centers, and we even had a horse ride and a boat ride here on the river. But I thank them all for their courage every single day in protecting this country.
Thank you, Senator Brett.
First, I'd like to thank Senator Cornyn for bringing us here today. Obviously, his continued leadership on this issue, bringing firsthand knowledge and bringing his colleagues to be able to see all of this up close and personal. As Senator Fischer said, it's one thing to hear about it, it's another thing to see it. And I urge President Biden to come down and truly see it. In his first 2 years of his presidency, he's spent only 3 hours here. In the first 2 months that I've been sworn into office, I've been here 3 times. That's because I know that this is one of the greatest crises facing our nation. It is not only a humanitarian crisis, it's a national security crisis. It's both. We got to see that last night as we walked up and down the border, got to see people who were trying to cross. A woman with a 6-month-old baby and a couple with a 6-year-old little boy. When we looked at that and thought that they made it, they told us about the kids who don't. They told us about finding a 15-year-old who drowned in the river. The cost of this crisis is real. We were able to put a face with it last night. When you look at national security and you look at what's happening, a hotbed of terrorism that we have in Afghanistan, you look at what's happening across the globe, it was startling to hear that in this sector alone, there was an increase of Chinese nationals year over year by 488%. Wake up. We must secure this border for the safety of our communities, the strength of them, and making sure that our children can thrive. As a mama, I look at this fentanyl crisis. I have a 7th grader and an 8th grader. This crisis knows no bounds. In the state of Alabama, we had to use Narcan because of overdoses 15 times the first 2 months of our school year. What I am telling you is that under the failed policies of the Biden administration, every state, including my great state of Alabama, has become a border state. How many people have to die before enough is enough? It is like an airplane going down every day in this nation. 300 plus people die of fentanyl poisoning. Folks, we must do something. And to all the moms and dads out there, talk to your children. Because what is happening with China sending things to Mexico, it coming across our border, this fentanyl and this poison infiltrating our entire nation, someone can think they are taking one pill, but yet it is laced with something else. And then we no longer have the opportunity to watch them thrive. So thank you, Senator Cornyn. Thank you to my colleagues. Look forward to continuing to make this a priority. And we encourage the Biden administration, Vice President Harris, and our Democratic colleagues to come down and see this firsthand as well. Thank you.
Senator Ricketts.
Well, thank you, Senator Cornyn, and the Customs and Border Patrol who hosted us on this visit to find out more about what's going on here in the southern border. And I want to reiterate, it's a common theme you've heard from everybody, that every state is a border state. This is not my first trip to the border. I was previously governor of Nebraska. And we saw the effects of this undefended border in our state. Under the Biden administration, the amount of cocaine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine have been going up 2, 3, 5 times what was confiscated by our Nebraska State Patrol. The Omaha DEA saw tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl. And to Senator Britt's point, it has an impact in our state as well. Taryn Lee Griffith was a young mom of 2. She took a pill she thought was Percocet, but it was laced with fentanyl. And she overdosed and died. And that young life was cut off. That's the cost of the Biden administration's failed policies here at the border. January alone, 1,400 pounds of fentanyl has been confiscated, over 10,000 pounds of methamphetamine, over 156,000 people crossing the border illegally. That's just January. And the message here was, give us the resources and enforce the law. You don't need any new laws, just enforce the law that we have here today. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death for 18 to 45-year-olds in America. Think about that. Fentanyl that is coming across our border. This is preventable. It takes the Biden administration to take this seriously, to enforce our laws and secure the border. And we could start reducing these deaths. Those fentanyl deaths are up 94% because of the failed Biden policies. The Chinese Communist Party is benefiting, not only by the increased Chinese nationals coming across the border, because they're selling the things that make the fentanyl and get it to our borders. This has got to stop. As governor, I was down here with my colleagues to be able to talk about a 10-point plan to reduce the amount of illegal immigration and to secure the border. I'm proud now to be in the U.S. Senate, to be able to work with my colleagues, to put the policies in place to hold the Biden administration accountable for their failures here and what it means to our country, and to try and stop all these deaths. Thank you all again for being here today. I very much appreciate it. With that, I'll turn it over to Senator Cornyn.
Anybody have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Senator, thanks for coming. Earlier this week, and you've said numerous times, it's going to take a bipartisan solution to fix the immigration situation. Why are there no Democrats with you today? Did you invite them?
Well, about 6 weeks ago, I was with a bipartisan delegation in El Paso and in Yuma, Arizona. As I said, this is the 10th group of senators I've been with to come down to the Valley. And that same bipartisan group that visited El Paso and Yuma a few weeks ago is going to Mexico City on March the 19th to visit with President Lopez Obrador and to visit with the leadership there to see if there is something we can do together. The fact is, Mexico is our largest trading partner, and the healthier the economy in Mexico is, the better it is for the United States. But right now, the Mexican government is overwhelmed in terms of their ability to push back on the cartels that are controlling so much of the drug traffic and the human trafficking there. So I'll stand by my words. The most important, to get something done, it is going to take a bipartisan solution, which means we need some help from President Biden and Vice President Harris. But we're here because we care, and we're all willing to pitch in and do our part. But in the end, it will take a bipartisan result.
Senator,
yes,
what's your perception? Do you think Border Patrol is ready once Title 42 is no longer used?
Well, Title 42, of course, is the public health title that implemented during COVID, and it is one of the tools that's important that Border Patrol has been able to use to turn back particularly adult males. As you know, some of the unaccompanied children and the families are exempted from that Title 42. The Biden administration has issued some new proposed rules that will go into effect in May, and we're looking at those very closely. But the problem is, as you've heard from my colleagues, we don't necessarily need any more laws or any more rules. What we need is the Biden administration's will to enforce the laws that are already on the books. There are procedures in place where our Border Patrol professionals can expedite the removal of people who have no legal right to come into the United States, and there are ways we could expedite the consideration of asylum claims without the terrible policies of catch and release, which do nothing but encourage more and more people to come because they know they're ultimately going to be successful under the current policies. So we're looking very closely at what the Biden administration has proposed, but I'm sorry to say that just passing some more rules is not going to be a substitute for the lack of will to actually enforce the law.
Like the use of the CBP One app?
Pardon me?
Like the CBP One app?
Well, that's one piece of it. If we can get people to come across the ports of entry rather than between the ports of entry, that would be a good thing. But there has to be some consequences associated with people trying to come through the between the ports of entry and claiming asylum. Because right now, when they call home or when they watch on TV, they see that people doing that are successful in making their way into the interior of the United States. And as we've heard time and time again from the Border Patrol, what encourages people to come illegally and outside of our regular legal immigration paths is the sense that there are no consequences associated with doing it the wrong way. And the only people getting rich over this are the cartels who care nothing about the people, and unfortunately the families that are suffering the overdose deaths because of the drugs that are coming across the border are paying a heavy price for the failure of the administration to simply enforce the law.
Senator Cornyn, you and Henry Cuellar and Cindy Gonzalez, in a bipartisan way, came up with some money, and now the state has matched that. So over the last 18 months, the port of Port Mansfield is now a deep water port. Problem is, Deepwater Port collaborates with the inland ports of Roma and Rio Grande City. We need, and Governor Abbott agrees in my conversation a few days ago with him, we need a border security, homeland security broadband service between this river and the checkpoints. It's no man's land in the middle. So thanks to you and the money and dredging, now we've got all this commerce going back and forth, okay? So we need border broadband for Homeland Security. Homeland Security on the federal side needs it. DPS, Emergency Management needs it. We need FM radio along that middle point, that no man's land between the river and the checkpoints. What can you and your
Well, I'm
five-
glad we were able to help some, but the sad fact is that the state and local governments are having to fill the gap left by the failure of the federal government to do its job. And yes, we need more infrastructure. Yes, we need more boots on the ground. Yes, we need better technology. This is a federal issue because it's a national issue. It's not just up to the border communities here and the state of Texas. But I'm grateful to the Department of Public Safety and the Texas National Guard and to Governor Abbott and the state leadership for filling the gap left by the failures of the administration. But in the meantime, we'll try to do the best we can. Yes, sir.
These Chinese that are coming over, the increase has been astonishing, right? Are they being released or are they being deported? Because, you know, the tri-states are being deported. Everybody else is being deported. What's happening to these Chinese?
Well, the truth is that, as I learned from the U.S sector recently, that they're seeing people from 176 countries that speak 200 languages. So this is a global phenomenon. It's not just a local phenomenon. And then, so it shouldn't surprise anybody if Chinese nationals show up and are detained at the border. And we don't know how many have gotten through, the so-called gotaways, who are trying to avoid the border patrol. So we don't really know what the scope of the problem is. But under current practices, if they claim asylum, then they're likely to be released into the interior of the United States with a notice to appear for a future court hearing. And the truth is, most of the times they don't show up. And so, as I said earlier, the Border Patrol has taught me an important lesson by saying there have to be consequences to doing it the wrong way. We want people to immigrate to the United States legally, but we don't know what the motivation of these folks are, what they are going to do once they make their way into our local communities, and that ought to be of concern to all of us. You've heard the words national security. This is a national security threat because we don't know, are these people who are on the terrorist watch list? We don't know whether they come from places like Iran, where the Revolutionary Guard has been identified at the border. We just don't know, and that's the product of failed enforcement policies where we need to know who is coming to the United States and what their reasons are, and they need to do it the right way, not the wrong way.
2 more questions, folks.
I have a question before you answer. You brought up mothers and children, and you know from being down here and covering the border, we have a very good idea of what you see. We see it too. We always ask ourselves when we see kids and babies, what is there tomorrow? When is that kid going to be in a home with friends, a neighborhood school, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, come home after school, play, do your homework, watch TV with your family, go to church on Sunday? What's your estimation, given the fact that you're senators and you're privy to information faster than we are, deeper than we are? We have to work very hard for it. You have things come across your desk. What do you know about the future of these children who come across the border and then we never see them?
You know, I may have to lean on some of my colleagues who have been here a little bit longer, who've had an opportunity to kind of dive into that. But I will tell you, as a mama, seeing it, those are the very same questions I ask myself. And you think about the fact that we keep talking about the Biden administration's policies. And the truth is they're creating this chaos for these young children. Because these young children, I've been down here now 3 times, as I mentioned. The last time I was here, I saw several little children trying to cross the Rio Grande. It is inevitable that one of them will be and has been swept away. And so you think about the danger that each and every one of those children is being put in. You also think, we've heard time and time again about these children that are walking across alone, who come with a phone number. Right now, current policy, they are giving that child over to that phone number. We don't know whose hands we're putting that child's fate in, and that is totally unacceptable. We wouldn't allow that to happen in a third world country. This is the United States of America, and we need to begin to act like it. And it starts with securing the border so that we do not have these policies that encourage people to come over illegally, and then creating an environment where we can deal with that one-on-one.
The only thing I would add is that last week I was at Johnson High School in Hays County, just right outside of Austin, and heard from two families that lost teenage sons to fentanyl poisoning. And they thought they were taking something else. They thought they were taking something that would not kill them, but yet, as we know now, one pill that contains fentanyl can kill. And that's where 71,000 of the 108,000 Americans who died of drug overdoses have died from that synthetic opioid called fentanyl. The precursors, the basic ingredients come from China. They come to Mexico, and the cartels make it and then sell it across the border. But there's another consequence, too. You mentioned what happens to these kids. Last week, or within the last week, I believe it was, the New York Times did a major investigation story about the fate of young children who come across the border and are simply lost into the great American heartland. And unfortunately, many of them are involved in underage forced labor. Many of them, unfortunately, are recruited into gangs. Many of them are themselves involved in some criminal activity or being sexually abused. This should be shocking, I think, and should be shocking to more Americans. But I want to just close on this point. I can't remember, one of my colleagues mentioned, maybe it was Senator Britt, the fact that the 108,000 people who died last year of drug overdoses, that's the equivalent of a major passenger airline crashing every day for more than a year. Now, I'm old enough to remember 9/11, where 3,000 Americans died as a result of a terrorist attack. 3,000. We went to war. But I don't know what it takes to shock the conscience of the Biden administration into working with us to try to solve the problem. We are ready, willing, and able to try to address this problem, but to ignore it is simply inexcusable.
Last question.
Can I make one observation on that?
Yep.
You asked a question earlier about why there aren't more Democrats down here. And I think the answer is, part of it is John's tried to get Democrats down here, but the majority opinion of Democrats in Washington is an open border. It's that simple. And you look at the consequence of that, you just heard about it. We looked at some, in the faces of women and kids last night. There is nothing humane, there is nothing compassionate about the policies of this administration. And I heard something this morning which I thought was pretty astounding too. And that is that the border czar in Washington, D.C., the vice president, has never talked to the border czar in the state of Texas, nor has she talked to the leadership of the Border Patrol down here. And they've not made the trips down here, as already been pointed out. These policies are failed policies, and it's really a disgrace. And we've got to have, they have got to find out, and we've got to get more of them down here to see what we've been seeing, because at least maybe then there would be a few Democrats who'd be willing to help.
We hear open border tossed around so much, but now that you've been down here, tell us what that means for our viewers. What's an open border?
Well, I think that for all intents and purposes, it means that we're not enforcing our immigration laws. And so, people come in many cases, if they are apprehended, they go through a process. Ultimately, they're released. They're told to come back to have a hearing to adjudicate their case at some point, which now is over 4 years. 4 years and over 2 million people backed up on that list. Essentially, it just means that when people get into this country, they're in the country. We put up a huge welcome sign, and you can't fault people from south of the border from just pursuing market signals. If there's an incentive to come, they're going to come. And there isn't anything this administration is doing right now that suggests at all that we want to have an orderly process or have a lawful process by which people get into this country. And as a consequence of that, you see the types of scenes that we saw last night with those women and children.
Let me just say one last thing along those lines. We look at the national picture, we look at the impact on the state of Texas, but let's talk a minute about border communities like this one. They have limited resources for health care, for law enforcement, and they're overwhelmed. You've heard a couple of my colleagues say that every state's a border state now because of the proliferation of these drugs, as well as the network of criminal gangs that are responsible for a lot of the violence that we see in this uptick in crime across the country. This has all sorts of first, second, and third order consequences that are really affecting every single community. Now, there is one area where the law needs to change, and that has to do with asylum, because literally some people are showing up at the border and turning themselves in. You've seen that phenomenon time and time again. And if they're just simply released into the interior of the country, then the perception is, well, I can come too. If I talk to my relatives, if I see that on TV, maybe I can do that. And like Senator Thune said, who wouldn't want to come to the greatest country in the planet? So we need to fix that policy. The Biden administration has made some proposed rule changes, but the burden is on them to prove that they actually will work and that they actually have the political will to defy some of their open borders base in order to fix that catch and release system that's responsible for a lot of the asylum seekers simply melting into the landscape, never to be heard from again.
All right,
Thank you.
That's all I've got time for today. If you have any follow-up questions, you can come find me. I'm happy to help.